Thank you.
What's up, Sean?
Hello, ladies.
Hello.
And some guys.
Okay.
It's great to be back at the beer tavern.
Yeah.
So, how many of you guys like heteronormative relationship comedy? Then I'm probably not the comedian for you. However, if you like jokes about some straight up nerdy shit like comic books and history, I'm your guy. Good words!
I was saying words.
Now, I'm going on pretty late tonight, and I'm generally I don't have a problem with that, but at this point, like my rum buzz is kind of fading, and I'm a little worried about making it through this set. However, the good thing is I still went on before DK, and therefore I don't have to worry about tripping over his props. Anyway, this is my third time at Bear Tavern Comedy Night, and I really love it, and I always appreciate Kevin putting this on. I mean, this is a great event. I mean, it's really blowing up lately.
Still too soon. I speak very fast. Too soon. No.
Okay.
So,
4 blocks over.
anyway,
I'm gonna blow up a gas man.
so it's spring now.
Against the wall, didn't you? Yeah.
And the great thing about spring, I was actually at Jamestown, Virginia last weekend, and I learned something about spring, and that is that the Powhatan Indian word for spring is catapuke.
They should like that when I'm swallowing. It's not messy.
And,
Time to say it.
And that's the second.
and both of my cats have been celebrating catapuke all week. On the bed, on the computer, on the nightstand, on me. I don't know what else to do. They just puke all over the place. But hopefully summertime will come along and it'll probably be like cat shit or something like that. And I'll have another problem. Anyway, for those of you who know me, you probably know I'm a teacher, and I work with an interesting set of kids. There are drug dealers, arsonists, guys who are away for assault and sex offenders, and just every variety of criminal element in the teenage world ends up in my school. However, as hardcore they think they are, their attitudes and their behavior doesn't really seem to carry it out. Because they're constantly complaining about how cold it is or how hot it is. And I really just want to say, like, dude, you'll sit on a street corner in August when it's 105 degrees selling crack. But this classroom is too hot for you? But at the same time, they're still like back a couple years ago when Twilight was the big thing, they were all really into it. Like, one minute they're talking about like carjacking somebody, and then the next is like, you ready to see Twilight this weekend? That joint is gonna be off the hook, yo. I'm like, you are so not gangsta. You just lost all your gangsta points with that one sentence. I have no more respect for you. Go out and shank somebody or something, because you just lost everything. Anyway, I had this one really interesting kid. He's gone now. He got discharged, but he was just the most bizarre little child. And he had the most interesting comments when I was saying something. I was talking about presidential impeachments one time, and I mentioned Richard Nixon and how Nixon almost got impeached. He was caught committing a certain crime, and his response was, "Reindeer hustling?"
Yes.
Exactly that.
And that pretty much my response was,
Yep.
"No, but that's awesome." And then a couple of months ago, we were studying presidents, and I always have my kids do this project where they do research on a president. So I was giving all the kids the opportunity to choose a president, and this kid says, I want to do Harrison Ford.
Yes.
And I had to pause for a minute, and I was like, wait a minute. Harrison Ford played the president one time. And then there was also a president named Ford, and two of them named Harrison.
930 days.
And I almost let him do it. But you know, he was a funny kid, and he's gone now, and I'm kind of disappointed in that because he always had a great response to the stuff I said. However, one thing that my kids always constantly ask me if I play video games, and I don't have any problem with people who do play video games. You know, it's a fun hobby. I can't get into them. However, like last year when the new Grand Theft Auto came out, remember that? And like all the GameStops and all those stores were like crowded as hell, and you couldn't get in. And I was like walking by one at the mall one time, and I saw this guy get out of his car and then go inside so he could get the game. And then I stole his car.
That's a cute joke.
Nah, it's okay. I didn't keep it. I returned it.
Aww.
Just left my Alanis Morissette CD in the CD
Was it Jagged Little Pill?
Of course.
Jagged Black Pill. Last one.
Is there any other last one?
That's a game joke.
That's what they call you too much. That's why they call me the Lord.
Speaking of cars and driving, I don't know about you, but there's one example of time when I'm driving and I just like feel like the coolest motherfucker around. And that is when I turn around and drive backwards. You know? So you're familiar with this, right? I don't know what it is about that, but every time I do that, I just like, damn, I should be wearing a leather jacket and smoking a cigarette, you know? I don't know. Anyway, I mentioned I'm a teacher, and a couple of weeks ago, the IT people at work changed all the passwords on the computers and stuff. And I really hate when they do this because I always have to come up with a new password, and I always have that one standby password that I can use that I always remember. But it no longer fits the description of a password that's acceptable because it doesn't have like a number in it or a capital letter. So I was like, man, I got to come up with a password that fits this description that I can remember. And at the same time, I was drinking a Coke. Now, it was one of those Mexican Cokes in the glass bottle because it's got the pure sugar in it, right?
Nice.
Yeah. Because I'm a health nut and I like to drink healthy. So I'm drinking this Coke and I'm like, what can I use? It's got like at least 10 letters, got a number in it, and a capital letter. I was like, so I just typed in Mexican Coke 2.
Use a password manager.
So now I have an appointment with Human Resources about the drug problem. I mentioned I had cats earlier. I love my cats, but they get in my face all the time, especially when I'm doing things like using computer and reading or eating. And I was eating some nachos a couple of weeks ago. And Barbie gets on the table and starts walking across the table. And I'm like, get the hell off the table, I'm eating. But in the process of like shoving her off the table, her tail smacks into the jar of nacho cheese. So I was like, chasing her around the apartment with a wet washcloth, trying to make sure she doesn't get cheese all over the place. And then, so I got her and I hold of her and I cleaned the cheese off of her. But, I was telling the story about that whole situation later, and my friend said, "That's not what that expression means."
What?
Think about it.
Nacho
cheese.
No, eating pussy, for crying out loud.
What?
All right, well, that one, Bob.
I thought it was funny. I thought you were going to say, don't get your cheese in your pussy. That's the phrase.
Because that's an expression I say all the time.
Don't get your cheese in your pussy.
I missed the jokes.
That's totally a thing.
Anyway, I'm not here to talk about cats. I'm here to talk about Thomas Jefferson.
He was a cool cat.
And there's actually a story about Thomas Jefferson that's just completely just off the wall, insane and crazy. And I'm not sure if he was legit about this or he's just completely trolling everybody in it. But in the 1780s, he was appointed to be ambassador to France. And he showed up in France, and he ended up getting in arguments with all these French people about, America and what was great about America, and how they always said that Europeans were superior and Europe was superior, and the land is inferior, the animals are inferior, the people are inferior, and Jefferson just wasn't taking this shit. And he set out to prove that the Americans were superior in all ways. And he really got hung up on this whole animal business. So he started writing letters back home to America to all his friends, Washington, Madison, Benjamin Rush, and Franklin, and all these guys, asking for information and telling them to measure various animals and send the measurements back to Europe to him so he could prove that American animals were superior.
This is awesome.
So at one point, even James Madison at some point has actually documented measuring the genitals of the Virginia weasel.
Oh my.
But they're internal.
That's a hobby.
Will they come out?
Thank you, Matt. If I'm ever in that situation, I know who to turn to. But eventually that he got hung up on his old idea about moose, and that the superiority of American mooses over European mooses or meese or mice or whatever they're called. I'm not a veterinarian or anthropobiologist or whatever. So he wrote back to America, to all these people, and he says, "Find me the largest moose you can find, kill it, and send it to France." So some guy out in New Hampshire actually, heard a story about this giant moose that got shot and killed, and so he went out and got it, and he tried to preserve it as best as he could, and then he had it shipped back to France.
Oh, this is good.
So, by the time the entire moose makes it to France, it's been like a year since it's been killed. So this rotten, nasty corpse of a moose arrives in France.
Maggots.
And Jefferson's like, voila, look at how awesome the American moose is compared to the European mooses. And the French were clearly not impressed, and actually the guy who he was arguing with about it, just ended up dying 2 months later. Probably from some disease he caught from a dead moose.
That's crazy.
Jefferson killing people with moose.
That's how we got smallpox.
Anyway, so Jefferson became president a couple years later, of course, and there was a community in Massachusetts called Cheshire, Massachusetts, and despite New England being a hotbed of Federalist politics, these people were solid, hardcore Republicans and pro Jefferson all the way. And to prove their loyalty and to help him win the election, they decided it was necessary to make the largest roll of cheese ever created. So they went out to all the people in the community, except for the Federalists, and demanded that they hand over all the milk from their cows for several days in a row until they gathered up all the milk they could, and they brought it to a cheese-making place, wherever it is they make cheese. I have no idea. That's a piece of research that was for another day. So they brewed up cheese, or whatever they do to make cheese, and they came up with this 1,230-pound, 15-inch thick, 4 feet in diameter wheel of cheese.
And then their cat wants a tail.
And they shipped it to Washington, D.C. for Jefferson, and as a way to say, your people in Massachusetts love you and support you. And Jefferson was like incredibly grateful for it, and he really appreciated it. In fact, he appreciated it so much that he actually paid them for it, because he was kind of one of those guys who would not accept gifts. He would actually pay for them, which was kind of nice. You know, they did destroy their economy trying to make some cheese. I'm sure some cows were very, very upset about it. Anyway, but the thing about the cheese is it sat in the White House for several years. And whenever people came to visit the White House to meet with President Jefferson, he would make them eat cheese before he said it. Yeah, it was like the very first example of government cheese. But until the point where it was like 2-3 years into it, the cheese was still there. People were still reporting it being served at parties, and it was getting really disgusting. So eventually, as legend tells it, they secretly just kind of like shoved it in the Potomac River one night when nobody was watching, just so they wouldn't offend the people of Massachusetts who worked so hard to provide the cheese.
Is that a true story?
It's absolutely, honest to God, true.
That's fantastic.
So, Jefferson's a fun guy, except, when he was actually doing political stuff.
Great story.
Yeah, thank you. So it just wouldn't be a complete commentary on Jefferson if it didn't bring Hamilton into it. Because the two guys are just almost inseparable. They hated each other, but I swear that there was some sort of unspoken gay lust between the two of them. The sexual tension between them is just like you could cut it with a knife. But Hamilton was just so emo about everything that he actually, when Jefferson was running for president against John Adams, Hamilton wrote a 50-page letter to his friends about why John Adams was not a good president, even though he wanted John Adams to win. So it's kind of like, yeah, he's an awful person, his policies are terrible, but please vote for him over Tom Jefferson. But that's not the longest letter he ever wrote. When he was Hamilton was involved in our nation's very first sex scandal. So Hamilton was the first Secretary of Treasury, and a lot of the Republicans in the country didn't like him, and they were trying to accuse him of misappropriating nation's funds and trying to take the money. So they actually confronted him about it, and he was like, well, no, I swear to God, I was not taking money from the country. I was not doing that at all. But I was actually having an affair with this woman whose husband was trying to blackmail me. And then he wrote a 95-page pamphlet to tell everybody about it. I swear to God, your money's safe. I was just screwing this lady.
That's a clever technique.
Yeah, and too bad Clinton didn't use that either, because he could have totally shoved all of his other problems aside if he just said, yeah, I was just screwing her, and then wrote a 95-page article about it. Anyway, I will finish with telling you a little bit. One more thing about Hamilton. You can there is actually Hamilton's powder horn, the powder horn he wore in the Revolutionary War, is still in existence, and you can still look at it today. And one thing that's interesting about it, it has a unicorn etched into it. And on the hind quarters of that unicorn is etched a flower, which I think probably makes Alexander Hamilton the world's first documented brony. So thank you all for listening tonight. That's your history lesson. I'm Lothar. Good night.